Chapter 18. Even young dragons like Ralph have powerful wings that can carry them at great speeds. Although the Purple Mountains were miles from the enchanted forest, it wasn't long before Ralph was following the contours of the foothills and skimming the mountainsides. Angling into a valley pocketed with caves, he suddenly darted into a large opening. The cave narrowed at the back, forming a long, smooth-sided tunnel. It was dark and gloomy inside, and I couldn't imagine how Ralph could see well enough to fly. However, the deeper we went, the better I understood why his grandfather lived there. Great patches of lichen grew on the walls, glowing like witches' lights. Delicate crystalline flowers bloomed on the walls and floor. We passed through larger caves where columns of multicolored rock rose from the floor to the ceilings high above. I saw solid rock that looked like flowing water and clear pools of water that seemed to be bottomless. It was cooler than it had been above ground, but not as uncomfortable. We began to smell a pungent odor soon after we entered the first tunnel. The deeper we went, the stronger the smell was, until the air seemed thick with it. The tunnels branched occasionally, and a few of the passages belched hot air. I was happy when Ralph passed those by.
"When we get there," whispered Edric, "I'll look around, in case we have to get out fast. You can't trust dragons, and we may have to escape if the situation turns bad. Whatever you do, don't sneeze."
My fingers were growing numb from clutching Ralph's ridge when we entered the chamber, larger than any others.
"This is Grandpa's treasure room," said the little dragon as he landed on the floor. "He spends most of his time here."
Edric immediately hopped down while I took my time and looked from my elevated vantage point. Pink and white striped columns seemed to hold up the ceiling, while the squat cones rising from the floor glistened with dripping moisture. All kinds of objects were stacked on the other in tottering piles. Some, like the enormous mounds of precious stones, were glittering and obviously valuable. I wasn't sure about others, like the old shoes and stacks of yellowing parchment. A low-voiced murmur ran through the cave.
"You should go over there, although maybe you're more pink than red. Where did I put that one? I thought I had 6 of these." Grandpa likes to sort his treasures in different ways. Sometimes he does it by size, sometimes by shape, or "Who dares enter my cave?" boomed a voice so loud the piles shook and small objects clattered to the floor.
What I had thought was a mound of golden treasure wasn't treasure at all. It was actually an enormous dragon.
"It's me, Grandpa. It's Ralph. I've come to visit you, and I brought 2 friends." "Ralphie, my boy, come over here where I can see you," said his grandfather.
Wishing I had gotten off sooner, I clung to the ridge on the back of Ralph's neck while he flapped his wings and skimmed over the treasure. My heart thudded wildly. The nearer we got to Ralph's grandfather, the bigger he seemed. The Dragon King was the largest creature I had ever seen. Each of his scales was bigger than a human head, and ranged in color from yellow gold on his throat to red gold on his tail. The ridge on his back was tall and spiky, although some of the points had broken off and others were missing altogether. His age was evident from the scarring on his scales, the hair sprouting from his long pointed ears, and the way his claws were blunted by wear.
"There you are, my boy," said the old dragon, crouching down to peer nearsightedly at his grandson. "What's on your back? It's not some kind of parasite, is it? Or have you caught some disease? Maybe I should find my special ointment." "No, Grandpa, that's my friend Emma. Edric is around here too. They're frogs, Grandpa, and they saved my life."
I scrunched down as low as I could behind Ralph's ridge while he told his grandfather about the spider and us rescuing him. The little dragon made us sound wonderful, but I held my breath, hoping he wouldn't mention that we were actually humans. The king was so close his breath nearly blew me off Ralph, and the smell was enough to make my eyes water. Blinking, he bowed down until his snout nearly touched my head. He sniffed me, and I could feel his hot breath dry out my skin. When he sat back, he said, "You're right, they are frogs. Maybe you and your friends would like to help me. I'm sorting everything by color now. Come see my red treasures. Just don't eat my rose, Ralphie. I know how much you like flowers, but that rose is very special." The pile of red treasure wasn't large, but it was interesting. A red riding cape lined with wolf skin had been neatly folded and lay on top of a mound of sparkling rubies. Half a dozen pairs of dancing shoes shuffled around the pile, while a blooming rose trembled beside a restless magic carpet woven in every imaginable shade of red.
"Very nice, Grandpa," said Ralph, "but Emma and Edric were wondering if you know any green dragons." "Green dragons? Why, you don't say so. Of course I have some green dragons. Would you like to see them?"
"Yes, please," I said, my voice coming out in a little whisper. The old dragon was frightening even when he wasn't trying to be, but if he actually knew a green dragon and could take me to him, our search might already be over. Turning in his enormous pile, the king of dragons reached into a mound of emeralds. Now, where did I put them? He muttered to himself, scattering the emeralds beneath his groping claws. Squinting, he lowered his head so his nose was only inches from the pile. Ah, there they are, he said, holding up two small dragons carved from jade. Is this what you wanted? No, I said, my disappointment making the word come out more sharply than I had intended. Thank you, but we need to find a real green dragon. The old dragon huffed and dropped the jade figures back onto the pile. Why didn't you say so? There's no such thing as a real green dragon. But they have to be real. You must be mistaken. I don't make mistakes, young frog. Kings never do. I shrank back as the old dragon's nostrils flared and smoke puffed out of his gaping mouth. I'm sorry, but we have to find a green dragon to break a spell. Spells don't work if they're impossible to break, and this spell has lasted for years. Nevertheless, green dragons don't exist. Dragons are red, or blue, or yellow, or purple, or black, or silver, or gold, but in all my years I've never heard of a green dragon. Now, if you'll excuse me, I was looking for something. The old dragon turned away, his tail knocking over a small mountain of sapphires. I wonder where I put my scarlet pumpernickel, he muttered. Ralph sat back on his haunches and watched the old dragon go. I'm sorry we couldn't help you, Emma. It's not your fault. Thanks for trying. It's just that I don't know what we're going to do. We'll never break the spell if we can't find a green dragon, and if we can't break the spell, the kingdom of Greater Greensward is going to be invaded, and I might have to marry awful Jorge. Don't give up yet, he said. Why don't you look around while I help my grandpa? We don't have to stay long, but we'll hurt his feelings if we leave too fast. The little dragon crouched so I could climb off. Come find me if you need anything. I was going to ask if your grandfather has a feather from an old horse, but I don't think we need it anymore. How about some water instead? I said, rubbing the skin on my back. Your grandfather's breath dried me out. I have something even better, Ralph said. Leaping into the air, he disappeared behind the stacks, returning a minute later. Try this. It's the salve my mother put on me when I was a baby. Little dragons don't have tough skin until they're a year old. This gunk keeps them from getting fried when they're around other dragons. Ralph's salve was thick and white and smelled kind of minty, like spearmint leaves. Tilting the vial in my hands, Ralph poured out enough to cover me in a thin, sticky layer. It was cool to the touch, and when I'd smeared it on my skin, I felt cool all over. Thanks, I said, wishing that all my problems could be solved this easily. Once I was alone, I started thinking about grandmother's spell. If there were no green dragons, they couldn't really be part of the cure, so my grandmother must have tricked us back on the island, and I'd been foolish enough to believe her. But she had been so convincing. I was wandering around, not really looking at anything in particular, when I saw something move. A group of mirrors, both ordinary and magic, had been stacked on one another. The mirror closest to me showed an overweight peasant kneeling by a fireplace in a cottage with a sagging roof. I was already turning away when I realized it was Olfat, with his hair cut short and his beard just barely starting to grow back. I wonder how close grandmother is to finding him, I murmured to myself. The image blurred, and when it became clearer, I saw Olfat again. He was standing now and appeared to be talking to someone. Although I couldn't hear what he was saying, I could see from his expression that he was in the midst of an argument. I was watching Olfat gesture with his arms when I noticed the shadows were filling the room behind him. I gasped when they took shape, recognizing my grandmother and the other witches from the retirement community. The old man turned suddenly, but the witches were too fast for him. My grandmother's hand flashed, and Olfat disappeared. In his place cowered a small brown dog with sad eyes, floppy ears, and a white-rimmed muzzle. I jumped when Me Too streaked into view, his hooked beak and claws reaching for my grandmother. She gestured again, and the bird was gone. A moment later, the little dog began to scratch behind his ear with frenzied kicking of a hind leg. It seemed that she'd turned Me Too into a flea. Something clattered on the other side of the mirrors, and the image disappeared. Following the sound of the clinking, I found Ralph stacking gem-studded cups into the gold pile, while Edric stared at a golden helmet. From the way his skin was shining, I could tell that Ralph had given him the salve too. Are we ready to go yet? I asked. Sure, said the little dragon. We can go now if you want. I just have to say goodbye to my grandpa. Setting down the last of the cups, the little dragon left to find the Dragon King. Come here, said Edric. I want to show you something. Just look at the hinged visor on this helmet. Never seen anything like it before. I could really use this when we hunt the green dragon. There aren't any green dragons, Edric. Didn't you hear the Dragon King? If there aren't any green dragons, then Olivine must not have told the witches the real cure. Maybe she was holding back her secrets from Olfat. It's all been a waste of time. I kicked a spindle of gold wool lying on the floor and watched it spin in a circle. We might as well go home and tell Gracina. You don't suppose there's any chance she'll give up and help my parents, do you? I don't think so, said Edric. From the way she acted before, I think she'd fall to pieces if she thought she can't get Haywood back. But I don't think you should give up yet. The old witch's memory seemed to think it was possible. Wouldn't they know if green dragons were real or not? Just because the king says there aren't any green dragons doesn't mean it's true. He's half blind and spends most of his time in a cave. I think we should just keep looking. There's got to be at least one green dragon somewhere. Ralph was still talking to his grandfather when we found him. Thanks, Grandpa. We'll be going now. You're welcome, Ralphie. Come back any time. The Dragon King smiled a toothy grin that showed off his fangs. I flinched, and Edric put an arm around my shoulder in a protective sort of way. The old dragon lowered his head to look at us. Pointing with one gnarled claw, he said, "These two belong in my green pile. What are they doing over here?" "They're my friends, Grandpa. They're with me." "Then you'd better take them out of here. I'm working on the green pile next." "You heard the king. Climb on, you two." Ralph squatted down and extended his wing. "There's someone I want you to meet." "Is it another dragon?" Edric asked, helping me onto the little dragon's back. "Nope, but he's a friend of my grandpa's. His name is Charlie, and I think he can help you with something." "Hold on tight," said Ralph, spreading his wings. "Here we go." A current of hot air buffeted us as we headed up the tunnel. I held onto Ralph's ridge so tightly that my hands hurt. "Where does Shirley live?" I asked the little dragon. "On the highest peak of the Purple Mountains. He's a nice old god, just a little deaf." I closed my eyes and sighed. If only we could go home and didn't have to worry about war or magic or spells. If only I knew that I'd never have to marry Jorge.